Good morning. Welcome back. My name is Josh Rogin. I'm a columnist with the Washington Post. It's my distinct honor to be moderating this panel at my 13th Halifax International Security Forum. Thank you, Minister Blair. Thank you, Peter. Thanks to the staff for putting together this weekend. I can only speak for myself. It's been cathartic. It's been intellectually stimulating. We've had good conversations, good food. The weather, well, you can't have everything. Before we start, I just wanted to pay a very quick tribute to the man who's responsible for me being here 13 times, and many of you, I'm sure, the late Senator John McCain. And yeah, absolutely. So as many of you know, Senator McCain would often do an impromptu comedy routine at the lobster dinner. I'm not going to tell those jokes again right now. Okay, I'll tell a couple of them. He would often say, after my presidential election, I slept like a baby, sleep for 2 hours, wake up and cry, sleep for 2 hours and wake up and cry. What's the difference between a lawyer and a catfish? One's a scum-sucking bottom dweller, and the other one's a fish. He had one joke about Canada. It's kind of about Canada. He said, I had to write this down. He said, geographically, the United States is closest to Canada, geographically, closest to the UK politically, and culturally closest to the Kardashians. That's what he said. But in true John McCain style, he said something. His most famous quote about Russia is more prescient today than ever before. It's the topic of this panel. He would often say, Russia is, quote, a gas station masquerading as a country. That's what he would say. Unfortunately, as we've seen with the war in Ukraine, this gas station has now weaponized its resources in ways that have global repercussions. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, Vladimir Putin has systematically targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure, power plants, substations, transmission lines, in a deliberate effort to freeze and starve innocent civilians. These attacks are designed to punish, demoralize, and destabilize. A calculated attempt to break the spirit of the Ukrainian people. This winter, millions of families face freezing temperatures and darkness, not as an unintended consequence of war, but as an intended, deliberate act of cruelty. Yet in the midst of this destruction lies an extraordinary opportunity. Ukraine's grid, once heavily dependent on Soviet technology, now has the chance to become something unprecedented, a modern, resilient, and decentralized energy system built for the challenges of the 21st century. The war has forced Ukraine to think differently about energy security. Europe, too, has faced a reckoning. For decades, countries across the continent relied on energy imports from authoritarian regimes, betting that trade would ensure stability. But as we've seen, dependence on adversarial nations can quickly become a liability. Energy is not just an economic asset, it's a geopolitical weapon. The need to come up with strategies to defeat this weapon has never been more urgent. Today's discussion is not just about rebuilding what was destroyed, it's about building something better. How can we create microgrids, smart energy systems, and infrastructure that's sustainable and resilient to attacks? How can public-private partnerships help finance and implement this transformation? We're very fortunate to have three outstanding panelists who are leaders in precisely these areas. First, we have Mr. Tobias Lindner, Minister of State at Germany's Federal Foreign Office. Germany has been in the forefront of Europe's efforts to support Ukraine, not just with aid, but also in leadership in pursuing a more independent energy future. Next, we have Ms. Nancy Southern, Chair and CEO of ATCO and Canadian Utilities, trailblazer in energy infrastructure and innovation. And last but not least, we have Mr. Laurent Ruseckas, Executive Director at S&P Global in the United Kingdom. He will help us unpack the financial, technological, and geopolitical forces driving the reconstruction of Ukraine's energy sector. Minister, let me start with you. Can you help us frame this discussion by giving us an accurate snapshot of where we are heading into this winter in the effort to build resilience for Ukraine to get through the next few months, but also to build for the next few years or even decades? Thank you so much.
Thank you all, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure being here, and I believe when you ask where are we, for sure we are at the beginning of the winter. We see that Russia is getting more and more brutal. They have saved over the summer things like cruise missiles with the clear attempt to attack the energy grid this winter. Their aim is to make the Ukrainians freeze in the cold, to make them flee, to make them need to leave their homes to other European countries. So I believe, and speaking about the energy supply in Ukraine, we have to distinguish on the short term and the long run. On the short term, we need the Ukrainians to survive and to sustain in this hardest winter. And it means both military support as well as humanitarian assistance. On the military side, air defense is really key. You know that Germany, together with others, has set up this international alliance for air defense. We are providing further air defense systems, both in that alliance as well as on a bilateral basis, while at the same time we are providing humanitarian assistance, so the ordinary things that you need when the winter is coming, and energy assistance. We have increased our spending for the energy system since the Ukraine Recovery Conference this summer by 350 million euro. This goes mainly into the grid. It goes into a more reliable, more resilient system. And then later on, and we might talk about this later here in the panel, on the long run, we have to modernize the energy supply, both with connectivity to the grids of other European countries, as well as with the transition to more renewables, to a more decentralized system.
Thank you. Excellent. Nancy, that leads perfectly to my first question to you, which is, when you look ahead at what would be the correct mix of infrastructure, resources, investment, what does that look like? How much is fossil fuels? How much is renewable? How much is experimental? And in that framework, what are the capabilities of the countries that are represented by officials in this room to contribute to that? Help our audience understand where they can go back to their capitals and say, here's what we can do to advance that goal.
Thanks very much, Josh. May I first of all say thank you to Minister Blair, and thank you to Peter and the entire Halifax International Security Forum Board of Directors and your staff. It's been the best conference that I've attended, not as many as Josh, but I hope to overtake him someday.
Well, I'm going to keep coming, so it's going to be tough.
That's a really important question, and it's a complex answer. As Tobias said, there is an urgent need in the short term to get the Ukraine through the winter. And that's probably mostly diesel generators supplied by all of our nations, all of the NATO allies around the world. The longer term, I think we will all learn from weaponizing energy systems. And I believe that it's strikingly apparent that our traditional way of building large grids, the backbone, centralized baseload power plants, is actually a vulnerability for us, where we thought from an economic perspective, this was the most reliable, economic, efficient way to deliver electricity to businesses and homes. Today, we realize that this approach has actually, the weaponized approach, has actually taken away from much of the spirit, seeing those children over the Christmas season, not having a light to be able to read their homework or do their homework by, not having fuel and electricity to be able to cook and heat their homes. This is going to require a completely new design in my mind. It will be distributed generation. We will use advanced technologies for regulating how efficient the electricity is used throughout the country, and hopefully in other countries to adopt these new designs. But there will be a multiple, in my opinion, there will be a multiple complex of different types of technologies used for power generation. There will still be a need for some gas, and those will probably be modular cogen units that provide heat as well as steam as well as electricity. But there will be renewables, there will be battery storage, there will be pumped hydro storage using open pit mines to actually use gravitation to bring out electricity when you've got a shortfall. Thorium is something that's very present in the Ukraine. And thorium is actually a safer mineral to use than uranium. We haven't quite figured out how to get the fission efficient using thorium, but I think the advanced technologies and the excitement of using AI in the future will get us quicker to some of these major solutions at scale. So, and then we'll have to harden the grids, putting the wires underground so that the connectivity isn't as vulnerable from the air. And a number of different designs that we'll be using. I just want to touch on one thing, Josh. Sorry for taking your time, Lawrence. There is a supply shortage around the world for key infrastructure components. Siemens, for example, is just building a new factory in the United States, but it's a 4-year wait for a transformer. Every jurisdiction in the world has been moving towards energy transition, and we have a huge supply shortage. And so I think it's going to be incumbent upon us to think about where are we going to get the materials and the supplies for Ukraine. They will be easily accessible from China, easily accessible from Russia, but is that where we want the Ukraine to be building its grid from those materials again?
Interesting. Well, that leads us perfectly to your area of expertise, Laurent, which is how do we pay for this? How do we source it? How do the Ukrainians pay for it? And if I may just add a note to that question, what does it say about this war that when Russia wants to ramp up its production, they can ramp it up, but we're 3 years in and we're still facing supply shortages of critical materials and unclear path for long-term financing of critical infrastructure.
Thank you. That's a great point you made, Nancy, about the problems with not enough transformers as the world electrifies. Ukraine, I just want to say one thing about, you see the blackouts and you see the struggles, given the destruction that has been wreaked on its thermal generation in Ukraine, the transmission grids, the distribution grids, the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam, which was a crime against the planet, in addition against humanity. To have it working as well as it is kind of a miracle. Power grids are not simple. They're unbelievably complicated to manage. And then this war with the people, understaffed, private sector and state working together. I mean, what they've done, is for me, unbelievable. My parents in Michigan, every winter there's a storm, some power line goes down, they don't have power for 3 days. So it's remarkable what they've achieved in Ukraine. In terms of investment, I think an all of the above approach is definitely needed. I think you're going to, so obviously we're talking about, there's a period now where there's an active conflict. Hopefully in the future, there won't be an active conflict, but we have to start now. And there's a lot of efforts at the recovery conferences and all of this to try to stimulate investment, and they're too slow. One of the things that an obvious way for me to allow private sector companies to invest is to cover the political risk. For most companies, the political risk of working in Ukraine today, they're responsible to their shareholders. The risk they perceive, I think correctly, is too high. But there's ways to manage that. And everyone knows that, everyone's discussing that, and it's been achieved on a sort of one-off basis in certain cases. So there's a Danish partnership with Ukrainian company DTEC, which got backing from the Danish Export Credit Agency that covered that political risk, allowed the Danish company to come in to invest. So they're building some new wind in Ukraine. But that's That's the example I can give. You need a lot more of that. And I think it's achievable. And it just requires, and this is something that doesn't require so much money as it does the intense focus of all of the supporters of Ukraine to put political risk coverage into place so that things can start now and not wait for a perfect situation on the ground, which could still be some time away.
Excellent, thank you. Tobias, let me go back to you, because I think when we're talking about how to support Ukraine, especially in the financial realm, the Ukrainians have some ideas about that, as we heard yesterday. They think we should take the seized Russian assets and use that to support the reconstruction of Ukraine now. But most of the governments who are represented in this room don't agree with that. And I'm wondering, how does Germany see that tension, the need to invest more, and at the time when Western countries' budgets are going down and the strains domestically are going down? And if you could also talk about Germany's transformation from a country that was largely dependent, or at least somewhat dependent, on Russian energy to where you are now.
So first of all, on the financial issue, we clearly see the need, and that's why we are the second largest supporter of Ukraine after the United States, both militarily as well as financially, because both goes one hand in hand on, as I already said, you need to do air defense, military support, and at the same time strengthening the energy supply. And we clearly understand that after the Ukrainian victory, there needs to be a mechanism of accountability, both for the war crimes as well as financially for the whole damage of the country, and the need to reconstruct and renew the country and to make it fit for being an EU member in the end of the day. That's crystal clear. As you already said, it needs to go hand in hand together with the business community, and I believe partnerships between companies like from Germany with Ukrainian companies are the best way. On our own energy transition, we have learned a hard lesson. For me, it's very easy as a politician of the Green Party that was always opposed against Nord Stream 2, and history has proven that we have been right. It's easy to say that, but the country was naive and believed, the Russians were reliable suppliers on fossil fuels over the whole Cold War. You know this story. And we have seen that Russia is using energy as a weapon, both on the supply side to European countries as well as in Ukraine. And therefore, we fully decoupled from Russian fossil fuels quickly. That was tough. It's still tough on energy prices. It is a challenge. It would be a lie to say you can't do this without a challenge for the whole economy. But we succeeded. And we believe it's not going back to the past. We need to go to the future, also to renew our own energy supply. We have our German model where we decided to phase out of coal, and we have ended nuclear power. I'm not here to teach and preach, so if countries still believe in a different approach, I respect that. At the same time, we need to keep in mind climate action, caring about renewables. That's not something for the better days. It's security policy at heart, because it makes you more resilient, it's more decentralized, and in that case, it makes you less vulnerable also against military threats.
Thank you. Let me stay with you just for 1 second. Since you brought up Nord Stream 2, it seems as if there's been a 3-year-long international effort to sanction the Russian energy sector. And 3 years in, it doesn't seem to be working as designed, at least. And we heard this from our Ukrainian friends yesterday, too. They want more sanctions, tougher sanctions, more enforcement of sanctions. But if we're being honest, the sanctions busting is pretty universal. Europeans, companies, American companies, Chinese companies, you name it. The sanctions regime could be said to be breaking down. In that environment, what can Germany do? What can the United States and other allies do? Was it always just going to be this way, that the Russian energy sector was going to adapt to the sanctions, or is it too late?
I have good news and I have bad news. The bad news is you cannot snap your finger and you have the totally efficient sanctions regime from day one on, because there will always be attempts to circumvent it, to find ways to go around it. This Russian shadow fleet, for example, speaking about oil. So there is a necessity in adapting, in amending your sanctions, and having maintenance and compliance packages. I can fully understand that our Ukrainian friends are annoyed by this and that it's always not fast enough. I can fully understand it. But at the same time, and that's the good news, speaking about the European Union, and you know it always requires unanimity, and we have challenges inside the European Union, that's no secret. We have countries inside Europe who are still dependent on Russian fossil fuels. The good news is it goes on, and the next sanctions package is coming. Whoever believed that the European Union might get stuck in sanction package number 9 or something, we are now, I think, at number 15, and we are going to number 16. And the only message we have to Mr. Putin is the sanctions will go on, full stop.
Thank you, Laurent.
I mean, the problem, of course, is sanctioning Russian crude oil exports, which is where most of the money is coming from, is going to lead to much higher crude oil prices, and governments around the world don't want that. Now, Ukraine has an amazing opportunity at the end of December to take a step which, in effect, reduces significantly the revenue going to the Russian state. The long-term agreement signed in 2019 for gas transit through Ukraine from Russia expires at the end of December, and that's that. So the gas can stop flowing. That's at current prices, that's $650 million a month less going to Gazprom. And Europe, from the perspective of big countries like Germany, in terms of the Brussels institutions, they are not pressuring Ukraine, as they did in 2019, to continue transit of gas. However, we are seeing all sorts of reports since about May of some deals to continue some gas flowing through Ukraine. Whose gas is it? Sometimes a bit questionable. We've been hearing about this since May, and it's not Europe pushing Ukraine to do this. It's maybe Slovakia, it's maybe Hungary, and I don't understand. If that happens, no matter what the structure is, that is going to be money flowing to Russia to a certain extent, and to continue for Ukraine to earn 10 or 15% of that revenue in transit fees, to me, doesn't seem worth it when Ukraine can, in effect, stop this one source of revenue.
I understand that point, and I want to go to Nancy in a second, but it seems to me that you can change the flow of the energy, but eventually it still gets to where it's going to go. And, just for one example, we see that Indian purchases of Russian fossil fuels spiked tremendously. Then they refine it, and it finds its way back to Europe anyway. So we've got a global market where when you push down on one outlet, it just comes out the other outlet.
Yeah.
And very quickly, I wanted to ask you about the sanctions that we saw this week, which were sanctions on the Gazprom bank.
Yeah.
Is that significant? What should we think about that? Is that going to do any good?
By the way, your point is completely right if you're talking about oil products, LNG, pipeline gas. If Russia stops being able to sell that gas, there's nowhere else for that gas to go. It stays in the ground in West Siberia.
Got it.
The Gazprom bank sanctions, so the U.S. government announced a new round of sanctions against a whole bunch of Russian banks. Now, Gazprom bank in the gas supply to Europe has a unique position because Vladimir Putin, as sort of a way of cutting off some European companies but not others in 2022, there was a decree saying anyone who wants to buy our gas has to set up these 2 accounts at Gazprom bank, blah, 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 blah. So all of this continuing buyers of Russian pipeline gas in Europe are using and are required by Russian law to use Gazprom bank. So starting December 20th, unless something changes, Gazprom bank will be sanctionable if you're using it for transactions. So either the gas stops on December 20th, and that's not just gas flowing through Ukraine, it's gas flowing up through Turk Stream to Hungary and Serbia, or something happens. Traditionally, the US, with sanctions, has not tried to interfere in sort of gas supply. The US has never tried to sanction Gazprom delivering gas to Europe, et cetera. So I wonder if there may not be some waivers coming, possibly. In any case, we all, I think, expect and hope that gas supply through Ukraine is going to stop anyway on December 31st. So, but it's an open question. It's created a lot of uncertainty. I don't think the sanctions were done to target energy. Gazprom Bank is one of the biggest Russian banks that still was able to operate in certain ways. So I think that drove it, and energy maybe is a side effect.
Interesting. Thank you. Nancy?
Well, I think the discussion on the crinks yesterday was a really important discussion when you consider if you take in energy into account. There is absolutely no doubt there's discounted oil. There could be easily pipelines built for gas. But on the oil side, India has the largest refinery in the world. They've got a discount on the oil price. Their production is increasing. China has access to that oil. North Korea has access to that oil. And then if they become, where we used to think the Middle East was the superpower for the fossil fuels and energy, the crinks are the superpower on the energy front right now. So I thought there was an earlier discussion yesterday or the day before about increasing our own energy security and self-supply. You touched on a model in terms of financing and how we can actually help Ukraine get the materials required to rebuild the grid and the power sector in particular. I think number one, Tobias, I believe you would agree, as Ukraine begins to recover after victory, you want reliable, affordable, safe delivery. You don't want Ukraine to be a guinea pig for a lot of new products and ways of producing power to build the economic prosperity back up. So you want to make sure that you do this in a very pragmatic and sensible way. And there are models, and I will give you an example. FEMA, for example, in the United States, awarded our company as well as a US partner, Quanta, the contract. It's a 15-year contract. It's about $18 billion right now to rebuild the entire grid in Puerto Rico on the island. It's redesigning the grid so that it is hardened, so that the hurricanes aren't hitting and taking down the entire power system year after year after year. There is a bit of a problem because there is a hurricane every year. And so you're catching up on the hurricane damage while trying to build the new design. But that P3 is, I think, a pretty good model for we won't own the assets after they're built. We're constructing, doing the engineering, the design, and the operations of them. At the end of 15 years, FEMA is providing the funding. The Republic of Puerto Rico owns the assets at the end. And I think that might be a model that is useful in the future. It's the first time we've seen an entire grid being rebuilt on that financial model.
Thank you. I thought it was interesting that you said after the war is won. What part can be done now, before the war is won, and what are the challenges of rebuilding energy infrastructure in the middle of a war zone?
All of our countries are reaching out to countries, and I'm speaking from my specific knowledge in Canada with the humanitarian aid. Excuse me. I think it's this chair. The Admiral was sitting in this chair.
We're all not used to talking this much in 3 days, so yeah.
Asking for whatever extra supplies that we have. The problem is, in the humanitarian aid plea from our countries, the problem is there is such a shortage because we've all been experiencing hurricanes, wildfires, and so there's a lot of rebuilding going on as well as what we talked about in the energy transition. So there's not a lot of excess supply for modular generators to be able to be brought onto site. I think one area that I think we could do a much better job of, and Germany is really quite a leader in this, are the biodigesters, taking waste and producing energy from the methane out of the waste. And I think those can be quickly spotted in distributed areas using a lot of the agricultural waste, but also the city waste. And that may be a quick fix over a winter period and into where we get to the modernization of the grid again.
If I may add one quick thing, because we need to be honest. You know, for this winter, and the Ukrainian energy grid is mainly constructed out of Soviet components. it's important to get spare parts. So the money alone will not help you. And I'm really grateful for our Eastern European allies who have spare parts of those old ancient systems who are giving them to Ukraine in the end. Because you need, on the short run, you need to have spare parts, you need to repair the system, then you need to have pragmatic solutions like generators and all those things.
Yep.
And you need to, wherever you can protect the grid, be it air defense, be it passive protection, all those things. That's important for the winter now.
But you're right. It's all Russian technology in the power system in the Ukraine right now. And so you have to match those parts in the meantime.
Interesting. Let me move to an issue that I think we need to talk about, which is the fact that U.S. policy towards Ukraine is about to change. We don't know how, but we're going to have a new president who has a distinct view on America's role in Ukraine. We don't know what the decision is going to be. We don't know when it's going to be. But U.S. policy is about to change in a major way. And I think if we're having an honest discussion about Ukraine, we need to not overreact to the Trump phenomenon, but at the same time, we shouldn't underreact. And I would like to start with you, Minister. How is Germany thinking about the fact that there is a non-zero chance, maybe even a probability, that broad support for Ukraine, at least in the non-military form, the economic and development and humanitarian assistance, could go away soon, completely? It's a fact. Hopefully not, but we can't ignore that possibility. How is Germany, how is the EU preparing for that? How does that factor into all of these grand plans? Can all of this be accomplished and sustained if the United States government decides that it's no longer in the business of helping Ukraine?
First of all, I have to say I'm a humble state minister and no magician who is able to predict the future, and therefore I will not go into something you would call self-fulfilling prophecy or something. I believe it's important to make clear to the new administration in Washington that, first of all, military and civilian financial support goes hand in hand. It's not one against the other. And also our financial contributions, our reconstruction aid, humanitarian assistance, they are to strengthen the resilience and therefore the ability to Ukraine to achieve victory. It's not only about the military support. Second, we are supporting Ukraine for sure for reasons of solidarity and to stand on the right side of history. But we also support them because we have an own national security interest as European countries. If an alternation of borders by force in this century would be possible, Putin might not stop, but he might continue, and then you cannot achieve just and lasting peace in Europe. So anyone who thinks about stopping support for Ukraine is affecting the security interests of European NATO allies. We have to speak it out. And last but not least, what we see in Russia and the Russian behavior will not go away after the Russian invasion in Ukraine might have ended. Russia might most probably stay the same in its behavior. You cannot separate it from the theater in the Indo-Pacific. So when administration in DC, and I believe that's bipartisan, by the way, wants to have a tougher focus on North Korea, on China, you need to keep in mind it's linked. It cannot be separated from Russia's behavior. We see it in these days in Kursk. And that would be my attitude with which I would talk to the incoming administration in DC.
I understand, and please, I think that clearly there are a lot of people in this room that agree with you, and perhaps those arguments in the next administration will prevail, but perhaps not. And so I understand that you don't wish to talk about hypotheticals, but just between us. We're going to go, cameras down. Is there a contingency plan? Is there a backup plan? Does it exist? And if not, ought it not to?
So we have to make clear this is not 2016. We are much better prepared than 2016 when speaking about contingency plans, meaning that we have made clear we will have a constructive approach to the new administration. And for sure, we as Europeans are willing to do more, and that means to invest more, to spend more on our own security in a holistic understanding, be it on military issues as well as in a broader view on security. And this is not 2016 also looking to my own country. Our defense spending now is above 2%. We have stopped our dependency from Russian fossil fuels. Nord Stream is history, and we have taken a tougher chance on China too, also with respect to our 5G grid.
Thank you. Let me ask you, Laurent, same question. If the United States government no longer, sanctions relief could be on the table. We don't know what the pre-negotiations are. Minister, do you know what the pre-negotiations are? No? No comment. Okay. We'll talk later. But Laurent, if those sanctions get loosened as part of some sort of ceasefire deal, if the support for the financing that comes from the U.S. government goes poof, what are the implications of that? And what can, again, the people in this room do or tell their respective governments and populations needs to be done to mitigate for that and to plan for that rather than ignore it and then be surprised by it if it does come to pass?
Well, I'm going to try to stick to energy. Obviously,
sure.
the money coming for military, the money coming for direct support for the Ukrainian budget, and then some of the emergency things that Nancy was talking about, that has to be state funded. In terms of the energy sector, which could happen now and also in the future, I'm going to go back to this political risk insurance. That's not a cost. You charge for political risk insurance, you charge a premium that you expect will keep you whole. That's what insurance does, that's what insurance is. So there must be a way for mechanisms to be put in place so that private sector money, because it's going to be private sector money. There's not enough, to rebuild the Ukrainian power sector, which has to start now, has to do all the hardening that Nancy was talking about. It's going to be private sector money, and it can be facilitated by Europe on its own, without direct budgetary cost if they do the right thing and come up with clever ways to back it through political risk insurance.
Interesting. And then Nancy, from the business perspective, what are some ideas for not just to mitigate against the chance that the United States might pull back, but to make all of these plans that we've just spent all this time talking about faster, better, and enable private sector to do the things that Laurent is suggesting that they ought to be doing?
Where there's a will, there's a way. And I believe that, first of all, we can't. I so strongly agree with Tobias on we cannot let Russia win this in any way, shape, or form, or let them think that they won this. We must see victory in Ukraine, and they must be afraid of all of us once and for all. I know it won't be once and for all, but what happens with a new world order under a new administration is anybody's guess, but I can't help but believe, and unfortunately the CDS has left and the Minister of Defense, but we have, the majority of our Canadian troops are sitting in Poland doing training-ready exercises, as are all of our allies in NATO, in Poland right next door, Germany, and I can't imagine us letting this get out of control. I really can't. So then back to how we rebuild. This Kyiv School of Economics estimates just the power grid alone has sustained about $16 billion of direct asset damage. Oh. And another $40 billion of economic impact as a result. And that means that there's tremendous opportunity for growth and new equipment, new assets, new technologies, new jobs. And that actually gives people hope. It gives business hope. I hope it gives Ukraine hope that this is once this is over, and it must be over, there's a tremendous opportunity for a brand new world, a better world. And business will find a way, governments will find a way to support that. Insurance is definitely something in the meantime that's going to be necessary. But I have no doubt that the investment foreign and local European investment is going to be there willing and able to respond.
Excellent. A note of optimism, very much appreciated. We're going to go to questions in just a second. Start thinking about them. But first, one last question for you, Laurent. I read in the Wall Street Journal, take that with a grain of salt, but that there's a Miami financier named Steve Lynch who wants to purchase the broken Nord Stream pipeline. And what do we make of that? Good idea, bad idea? How's that going to work?
Well, so this is what happens when very smart people come up with business ideas based on geopolitical concepts without sort of having advisors that tell them a lot of details on the ground.
That's the world. That's Washington. Yeah.
So let's pretend. Let's pretend that, and I'm sure
that's the new world order.
Tobias Lindner can say this isn't going to happen, but let's pretend that there's peace and that Germany is happy to buy Russian gas again, and then you can use this one of the 4 strings of Nord Stream, one of the Nord Stream 2 strings that's not been destroyed, and use that. Uniper, German company, has won a 13 billion euro arbitration case against Gazprom. When Gazprom turned off the gas in 2022, 15 to 20 European companies sustained huge losses. All of them have filed arbitration cases against Gazprom. All of them will win. Uniper won 13 billion euros. That was the first. OMV won 200-something million euros. Let's say you build that pipeline.
Never to be collected.
Never to be collected. But if gas were to magically start flowing from Gazprom to Germany, okay,
it would be
the first 3 years, based on a reasonable low price and the capacity of that pipeline, the first 3 years would be free gas being delivered just to pay off these settlements. That's with a sort of cautious assumption about how much the ultimate cases against Gazprom will lead to. So take any project and take the first 3 years of revenue and take it out and say, Gazprom, you're not going to get any money for a long time. By the way, if gas magically continues to flow, it's going to flow across Ukraine. It's not going to flow through this pipeline. It'll flow across Ukraine so that Ukraine will get part of that revenue. I don't think it's going to happen. In our base case scenario, we don't have Russian pipeline gas ever returning at previous volumes to Europe. But so I think this particular idea, not a good one.
Got it. Mr. Minister, do you have an opinion on Miami financing?
You know, it's not my job to give advice on business ideas. What I can say is, there is no demand for Russian gas anymore in my country. So if this person, I only read it in the news, wants to dig out the pipeline and use the material for something else, okay, let's do it. But I'm not a business advisor. So
fair enough. All right. We'll go to questions. Can I just say, please tell us who you are, what your affiliation is, and if you please stand up when you ask the question. And if you want to make a speech, please put it in the form of a question. And let's start right there in the back.
Hello everyone, my name is Sofia, I'm from Ukraine, and I'm a winner at 15 at 15 Youth Build Democracy competition. And today my question... And today my question is, in what ways can renewable energy technologies such as solar and wind power be integrated into Ukraine's energy grid to ensure long-term sustainability and security? And also, maybe will there be such integration at all, and how soon it will be appear?
Excellent question. Who wants to take that? Nancy?
Well, I'll start. I think I missed the last part of the question.
How soon will it take?
Oh, how soon will it? Well, there needs to be a sense of stability. You don't want to build something that the Russians are going to attack right away. So renewable energy with battery backup storage, the pumped hydro storage is something that can be built rather quickly. But we have to make sure that it's done so that you have reliability. And you don't want to have intermittency that the wind and the solar does commit. So you need significant storage on the renewable side. I do think that there will be new modern technologies. I do think that the carbon capture side of gas-fired generation will come into effect. It's not affordable right now. But And then I really do believe in the waste generation, using methane from garbage and agricultural animal waste is a really simple, easy, affordable way to get power into distributed pockets of the country today.
Excellent.
And if I could just add,
Sure.
you don't have to be a member of the Green Party like Tobias Lindner to want solar and wind to be part of the solution. It's cheap. Obviously, you have to manage the grid issues, but solar, wind, battery storage, they're not technologies of the future. They're commercial technologies today, and just on the pure basis of cost, they're going to be a big part of the solution.
Excellent. Thank you. Down here in the front row.
The thing is, it's cold. When it's really cold, you don't have, in the wintertime, there's not a lot of sun and not a lot of wind when it's really cold. So you do need a lot of storage.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
So Espen Barth Eide, I'm the Norwegian Foreign Minister, and it builds on Sophia's good question, actually. Norway is now the #1 energy provider to Europe after Russia was cut out. And for that reason, we've also taken a deep interest in the energy repairs, but also energy transition of Ukraine. And it was well said here that, and kudos to the conference for having a panel on grids, because it is so instrumental both to energy security here and now, but also to energy transition. There is actually no transition without transmission. And we speak a lot about energy sources, but to have a stable, safe, secure transmission network is very important. My question is, there were a lot of good things said, but not so much about the connections to Europe, because I think a key element of saving Ukraine's energy is to connect it to the European grids, two-way street, both ways, and that and the very radical transformation away from fossils, which is happening in Europe and which has been accelerated by the war because of the fallout of Russian exports, should also be part of the solution for Ukraine. So that's my challenge to the panel.
There are grid connections, as you will be aware. It's a very good point. There are good connections with Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, Romania. Those are operating. I think it's about 2 gigawatts capacity, which is sort of peak load in Ukraine now is maybe 16 gigawatts capacity. So it is playing a significant role today. And then long run, in the near term, that's electricity flowing generally to Ukraine. But in the long run, I think Ukraine will be an electricity supplier to Europe because of the investment that will come in. And Ukraine does have this baseload nuclear that is there and will remain.
So just one comment. First of all, I agree. Second, as you know, we have already the first connections of the grid. But, especially in my country, for example, we have to invest in our grids anyhow because, renewing and adapting the grid to renewables, that's necessary anyhow. So let's use this transformation and the investment into grids also for the connectivity with Ukraine. And by the way, same is true when looking into gas. You know that we have invested into LNG terminals, for instance, so that we on the short and mid run are able to substitute what came from Russia in the past. But we do the investments in a way that we can use them later on for green hydrogen. And I believe that's the right attitude, investing now, not in the status quo or status quo ante, but into the future.
And the LNG picture in the United States might actually improve under the next administration. Is that right?
It might improve, but you see that transformation goes hand in hand. It means we also our demand for gas decreased. The industry adapted to the price signals, adapted to the new situation. So there will be a need over the next years for LNG, and in the future, the heavy industry, they need green hydrogen because it's simply physics. I keep it with that.
I read that hydrogen is the energy source of the future, and it always will be.
I doubt.
But I don't think we should get stuck on the colors of the rainbow for hydrogen.
Put a pin in that. We'll come back to that in the coffee hour. I want to get to at least one or two more questions. Ma'am, right here.
Hello, I'm Nicole Petrucci. I'm a colonel in the Space Force. Apparently I have the throat thing too, but I'm not sitting in that chair. I do want to get back a little bit to, we talked about renewable energy, and you also talked about how cheap some of these technologies are, but how do we prevent them from, because what we've seen as renewable energy technology is rolling out, what we've seen is those places with an increase in poverty, or they have unemployment, or they have a lot of pollution exposure, those actually don't get those renewable energy technologies rolled out to them. So how do we create not a bigger inequality in this as those vulnerable communities are there?
Great question.
I was at an event in Africa a couple weeks ago in Namibia, and there was a lot of discussion along these lines. What is happening is that solar PV, rooftop solar PV, is so affordable now that without government support, it's just happening. In South Africa, it's happening in Nigeria. That's not a grid that's on your roof, but that contributes to energy security, and it's affordable. I don't like when I hear energy. So the biggest problem in the poorest countries of the world is that they're burning traditional fuels, cooking fuels in their home, which is horrible for health as well. The solution there is not renewables. The solution there is LPG, propane, that sort of thing. And the fact that that produces CO2, I think, is irrelevant.
Yes.
Yeah, I just go back to the transmission comment, sorry. I agree, transition isn't without transmission. But I really do think that we need to carefully consider strategically how interdependent we are if energy is going to be used as a weapon. I think that we have to, we have to at least have backup. And so if your main transmission line from that great wind farm, excuse me, the cable's cut, what do we do as a backup? We've seen the communication lines cut, purposely, presumably. And so how do we prepare ourselves to have isolated generation that will provide backup power for our countries? And I think that's going to be critical in the future. Europe may be the best way to start that as a concentric approach. And I do think that the rooftop solar, there's an incredible new technology that is being produced in Poland that is it's a solar tape, basically. A company called Sol that we had to look at. The Ukraine government is taking a investment position in that, and you just apply it to roofs. You can see through it, you can put it on windows, and it actually generates electricity. So it's going to be interesting to see rooftop solar and the conversion of these new technologies that will be really important in the future.
Excellent. Minister, any closing words?
I believe you have to invest in resilience and backup solutions for energy grids anyhow, regardless of the source. When we see, for instance, in Ukraine, and you mentioned there the large share of nuclear power, when we see the Zaporizhzhia plant and how dangerous it is that Russia is violating its international obligations in handling that plant, it's always about the grid, it's always about resilience, regardless where the energy might come from. And to have a decentralized approach, for sure, it's also an investment into security and resilience. Yeah. I'll stop here.
So we're out of time. I do think we've made a lot of progress in defining the challenge. Now the task is up to all of you to go back and define the solutions. And always remember, what happens in Halifax does not stay in Halifax. And I look forward to seeing you all again here next year. And please give our panel a round of applause.
Thanks, Josh.